Hi everyone, my name's Clara, and I'm 34 years old. If you ever looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably think I had it all together. A decent career, my own place, and a pretty active social life. But if you zoom in a little closer, there's one constant thread that ties my story together. I've always been my family's unpaid helper. Not just unpaid, more like unappreciated, unacknowledged, and totally taken for granted. It started when I was a kid. My mom, Diane, had this way of phrasing things like she was asking, but really, there was no option to say no. Clara, sweetie, can you help me set the table? Setting the table meant folding napkins into elaborate shapes, arranging every fork, knife, and spoon with military precision, and making sure each plate was perfectly aligned. If it wasn't, Mom would sigh and say, "You'll get it right eventually." Then there was my older brother, Mark. He's 3 years older than me, and somehow dodged responsibility like a pro. When I was 12 and he was 15, he had a science project, a volcano made of papier-mâché. Guess who ended up building it? Me. I spent hours at the kitchen table painting and gluing, while Mark watched TV. And when his lava didn't flow perfectly during his presentation, he complained. My mom just smiled and said, "At least Clara helped you get it done. No credit, just a pat on the back for Mark." By the time I hit high school, my role as the family's go-to person was cemented. When my little sister, Lily, was born, my life turned into a never-ending list of, Can you just watch Lily for a few hours? Can you just help Mark write his college essays? Can you just organize the family reunion? I barely had time for myself, and it wasn't like anyone thanked me. In their eyes, I was this magical problem solver who made everything happen without breaking a sweat. And the favoritism? It was painfully obvious. Mark would mow the lawn once a month and get a standing ovation. Lily, the baby of the family, could spill juice on the carpet, and it was, "Oh, Lily, you're so silly." If I forgot to unload the dishwasher, though, it was, "Clara, why can't you be more responsible?" One summer, when I was 17, my mom decided to host a barbecue for the entire neighborhood. I didn't get asked if I wanted to help. I got a to-do list. Marinate the chicken, make potato salad, set up the chairs, and decorate the tables. Mark played video games, and Lily blew bubbles in the backyard. When I asked my mom why no one else was helping, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Because you're the only one I can count on, Clara." That was the first time I realized how unfair it all was. But I didn't say anything. I just sucked it up and got to work. Things didn't get any better when I went to college. I stayed close to home to save money, thinking I'd finally have time to focus on myself. Big mistake. My mom acted like living 20 minutes away meant I was still on call. She'd text me during lectures, "Clara, can you swing by and help me rearrange the living room?" Or, "Lily needs cupcakes for her bake sale. Can you make a batch?" If I said no, she'd pull the guilt card. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Meanwhile, Mark had moved out of state, and Lily was still a kid, so all the responsibility fell on me. It didn't matter that I was drowning in schoolwork. "You're so good at multitasking," my mom would say. "You'll figure it out." And somehow I did. I graduated with a degree in event management, figuring if I was going to organize everyone's lives, I might as well get paid for it. But even after I started my own business, the demands didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. My mom would call, "Clara, since you're an event planner, can you help me with Lily's birthday party? Just a few ideas. Nothing big." Nothing big always turned into a circus theme, complete with a popcorn machine and a clown. I spent 2 weeks finding vendors and setting everything up. At the party, my mom told her friends, "Isn't it amazing what you can do with Pinterest?" I was fuming, but I didn't say anything. I never did. Looking back, I wish I'd spoken up sooner. I wish I'd told them how much it hurt to be overlooked and taken for granted. But I kept saying yes, hoping they'd eventually realize how much I was doing for them. That day never came. Instead, things kept piling up, and it all came to a head when Mark got engaged. When Mark announced his engagement to Erica, I already knew what was coming. Erica wasn't exactly an easygoing person. She was the kind of woman who would return a coffee if the foam wasn't fluffy enough. When my mom called me the day after their announcement, I braced myself. "Clara," she said, in that sing-song voice she used when she was about to drop a bomb. "You're going to help plan Mark's wedding, right?" I hesitated. By this point, I'd already decided my time was worth something. My business wasn't booming yet, but I had clients, deadlines, and bills to pay. I couldn't just drop everything. "Mom, I don't think I can do it for free. This is my job now." The gasp on the other end of the line was so dramatic I almost laughed. "Clara, you can't charge family. He's your brother," I caved. Of course, I caved. I told myself I'd just help a little, give advice, recommend vendors. But deep down, I knew better. That's not how my family works. The next day, Erica called me with a list, not a friendly, "Hey, could you maybe," kind of list. It was a full-blown to-do list. "We need a venue for 200 people, she began. "It has to have a nice view, and it can't cost more than $5,000. Oh, and we'll need catering. Nothing fancy, just something classy and affordable." I wanted to scream, "A venue for 200 people with a nice view for $5,000? Was she serious? I nodded along, though. "I'll see what I can do," I said. That was just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, I became their personal assistant, therapist, and punching bag. Erica couldn't make up her mind about anything. One week it was a garden wedding. The next, it was a rustic barn theme. Mark, of course, didn't care. "Whatever Erica wants," he'd say with a shrug. I was juggling so many tasks I had to turn down paying clients. And guess what? Not once did I get a thank you. Mark would text me at all hours with things like, "Can you find someone to do custom invitations? Erica doesn't like the ones we saw at the store." One time, Erica asked me to hand-make 200 invitations because the ones online were too expensive. "You're crafty, right?" she said, as if I ran a DIY shop on the side. The final straw came with the seating chart. Erica wanted everyone placed according to some bizarre hierarchy that made no sense. Her college roommate got a prime spot near the head table, while our Aunt Marie, who basically raised Mark, was shoved to the back. I spent hours working on that chart, only for Erica to change it the night before the wedding. "Sorry, Clara," she said with a fake laugh. "I know it's a lot, but I just want it to be perfect." The morning of the wedding, I was up at 5 a.m., supervising the setup. I coordinated with the florist, caterer, and DJ. I even drove home to grab extra tablecloths because the ones they'd ordered were too short. And where were Mark and Erica? At a spa, getting massages and sipping overpriced smoothies. By the time the ceremony started, I was so exhausted I could barely stand. But I stayed because I wanted to see my work come together. I'll admit, it looked amazing. For about 10 minutes, I felt proud of myself. Then Mark gave his speech. He stood up, raised his glass, and started thanking people. Erica's parents got a heartfelt mention for funding the vision. His groomsmen got a nod for keeping him sane. Even the DJ got a shout-out. Me, the person who had literally spent 6 months making this wedding happen? Not a word. I sat there stunned. I thought maybe he'd thank me later, in private. Nope. After the speeches, he grinned and said, "Great job, Clara." Everyone loved it. That was it. That's when it hit me. They didn't see me as a person. To them, I was just a tool. A free service they could use and discard when they didn't need me anymore. At the end of the night, I stayed behind to clean up. Of course, no one else thought to do it. As I was stacking chairs, Erica walked by and said, "You missed a spot on the dessert table." I didn't respond. I just dropped the chairs and walked out. The next morning, my mom called, all cheerful. "Wasn't it a beautiful wedding?" "It was fine," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Well, we couldn't have done it without you," she added. I wanted to scream. "We couldn't have done it without you?" "No, Mom, I did it. You all just showed up and took credit." But instead of saying that, I mumbled something about being busy and hung up. That was the moment I decided, never again. No more free labor. No more bending over backward for people who didn't appreciate me. If they wanted my help in the future, they could pay me like everyone else, or figure it out on their own. Mark and Erica never even sent me a thank you card, but honestly, by that point, I didn't expect one. I knew exactly how much they valued me, which is to say, not at all. After the wedding fiasco, I thought I was done with being my family's go-to fixer. I'd made up my mind that if they needed help, they'd have to fend for themselves. But as much as I wanted to stick to my boundaries, there was one person who made it hard. My younger sister, Lily. Lily was 18 by then, in her second year at a small liberal arts college a couple of hours away. She'd call me now and then, but never just to chat. It was always, "Clara, can you do me a favor?" One time, she called me at midnight to ask if I could edit her essay because it was due the next morning. I told her no. I had an early client meeting the next day. She hit me with, "Wow, so much for being a supportive sister." The real drama started during her sophomore year. One afternoon, Lily called me, her voice all chipper. "Guess what, Clara?" I sighed, already sensing the setup. "What?" My sorority's spring gala is coming up and I'm in charge of planning it. Oh, that's nice, I said, trying to sound polite. Yeah, and I was thinking, you're so good at this kind of stuff. Could you, help me? Just a little, Lily, I said, keeping my voice calm. I can't. I'm really busy with work right now. But you're an event planner. This is, your thing. Exactly, I said. It's my job. I don't have time to do it for free. Her tone changed immediately. Wow, you're really not going to help me. After everything I've done for you? I actually laughed. What have you done for me, Lily? I don't know. Been your sister? I hung up. For a few weeks, I thought that was the end of it. I figured Lily would either find someone else to help or actually do the work herself. But no. She called me again a month later, this time frantic. Clara, I'm freaking out, she said, barely pausing to breathe. The gala is in 2 weeks and nothing is done. The venue fell through, the caterer backed out, and I have no idea what to do. That sucks, I said, trying not to sound too smug. Please, Clara, she begged, just give me some advice. I don't know what to do. I should have said no. I should have let her deal with the consequences of her own lack of planning. But part of me felt bad for her, so I gave her some tips. Basic stuff like how to find a last-minute venue and what kind of food works best for big groups. Thank you, she gushed. You're a lifesaver. But of course that wasn't enough. 2 days later, she texted me, Can you design the invitations? It's just a simple layout. It's not a simple layout, I replied. I can't, she whined. No one else understands my vision like you do. I ignored her. By the time the gala rolled around, I was getting hourly updates from Lily about how everything was falling apart. The tablecloths didn't match the napkins. The flowers were the wrong shade of pink. The DJ was late. The night before the event, she called me in tears. Clara, I don't know what to do. Everyone's going to think I'm a failure. I took a deep breath. Lily, you waited until the last minute to plan this. What did you expect? I just thought it would be easier. She sniffled. Maybe next time don't volunteer for something you're not ready to handle, I said. She didn't reply. She just hung up. The next day, I saw photos from the gala on Instagram. It was rough. The decorations looked thrown together. The food was served in disposable trays, and the lighting was straight out of a middle school dance. Lily's caption read, Not perfect, but we made it happen. I thought that was the end of it. But then, a week later, she called me again. Clara, you ruined my gala, she shouted as soon as I picked up. I blinked. What? If you had helped me, it would have been amazing, she said. But you were too selfish to care. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lily, I didn't ruin anything. You ruined it by not planning ahead. You're supposed to have my back, she said, her voice shaking. That's when I snapped. Lily, I've had your back your entire life. I've done more for you than anyone else in this family, and I've never asked for anything in return. But guess what? I'm done. You're an adult now. Figure it out yourself. Then I hung up. For months, Lily barely spoke to me. Whenever we saw each other at family gatherings, she'd glare at me or make passive-aggressive comments. My mom tried to mediate, saying, Clara, can't you just apologize? Lily's still learning. Learning what? I shot back. How to dump her responsibilities on other people. Even Mark chimed in. You were kind of harsh, he said one night. She's just a kid. She's 18, I replied. She's not a kid anymore. It was exhausting. No matter how much I explained myself, my family didn't get it. To them, I was the bad guy for not swooping in to save the day like I always did. But I didn't care. For the first time, I was standing up for myself, and it felt good. By the time Lily's gala disaster faded from everyone's memory, I thought I'd finally escaped my family's entitled nonsense. I'd said my piece, set my boundaries, and made it clear I wasn't going to be their personal fixer anymore. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Then came the dinner party. It started with a call from my mom. I was finishing up a proposal for a client when her name popped up on my screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Clara, she chirped, overly cheerful. You'll come early on Saturday to set the table, right? I frowned. What's happening Saturday? The dinner party for Mark's promotion, she said, as if I should have known. This was news to me. I wasn't invited. Well, of course not, she said casually, like it was no big deal. It's mostly Mark's colleagues and their spouses. You wouldn't really fit in. I froze. So, let me get this straight, I said, my voice tight. I'm not invited to the dinner, but you still want me to come early to set up? Exactly, she replied, as if this was the most reasonable request in the world. You're so good at these things, Clara. You've always had an eye for detail. I was speechless. For years I'd put up with their nonsense, but this was a new low. I wasn't good enough to be a guest, but I was good enough to do all the grunt work. My mom took my silence as agreement. Great, she said. We'll need you here by 4. Don't forget to bring extra napkins. We might run out. I hung up without saying another word. The rest of the week I stewed. I knew I should have said no right then and there, but old habits die hard. The people-pleaser in me felt obligated to show up. Still, the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. By the time Saturday rolled around, I wasn't just planning to skip the dinner, I was planning to ruin it. I showed up at their house just before 4 p.m., as instructed. My mom was in full hostess mode, bustling around the kitchen with her apron on. She barely looked up when I walked in. Clara, you're here! Good! The table needs to be set, the candles need to be lit, and the appetizers are in the fridge. Can you plate them? Sure, I said, keeping my voice neutral, but in my head, I was already plotting. First, I swapped the fancy linen napkins with some mismatched paper ones I found in the pantry. Then I set the table with plates and cutlery that didn't match. Nothing too obvious, just enough to throw off the aesthetic. I placed salad forks where the dessert spoons should go and deliberately skewed the alignment of the place settings. My mom was too busy barking orders to notice. Next, I moved on to the appetizers. They'd ordered tiny gourmet canapes from a fancy caterer. My job was to arrange them on trays. Instead, I accidentally knocked one of the trays onto the floor. Oops, I said, as I scooped them up and tossed them in the trash. The rest went into the fridge, but not before I cranked the temperature all the way down. By the time anyone got to them, they'd be half frozen. For my final touch, I sabotaged the drinks. Mark and Erica had splurged on a couple of bottles of fancy imported wine. I poured a liberal amount of salt into each bottle, gave them a good shake, and resealed them. Then I left a cheap bottle of wine on the counter as a backup. By 5 p.m., I was done helping. I grabbed my purse and told my mom I had to run an errand. She barely looked up from her seating chart. Just be back before the guests arrive, she said. I didn't go back. Instead, I made a reservation at my favorite restaurant and treated myself to a quiet, drama-free evening. As I enjoyed my meal, my phone buzzed relentlessly. First it was my mom. Where are you? The guests are arriving. Then Mark chimed in. Clara, this isn't funny. Mom says the appetizers aren't ready. I silenced my phone and ordered dessert. Later that night, my best friend Tara texted me. Check Erica's Instagram, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Curious, I opened the app. Erica had posted a series of photos from the dinner party, and let me tell you, it was a train wreck. The first photo showed the table, which looked like a thrift store had exploded on it. Mismatched plates, crooked napkins, and unlit candles. The caption read, "When your sister promises to help, but bails at the last minute." The next photo was even better. It showed Mark pouring a glass of the salted wine, his face contorted in disgust. The caption, "Note to self, never trust Clara with anything." I couldn't stop laughing. For years I'd busted my ass to make their events perfect, and they never appreciated it. Now, they were finally getting a taste of what life was like without me holding everything together. After the dinner party fiasco, I thought my family would finally get the message. You'd think ruining a whole evening would make them reconsider treating me like their personal assistant. But no, instead of reflecting on their behavior, they doubled down on blaming me. Mark sent me a barrage of texts, accusing me of sabotaging his big night. What kind of sister does this? He wrote. At one point, he even called me vindictive. That one made me laugh. Oh, I was vindictive? What about years of using me like a servant while ignoring my accomplishments? Erica, of course, had to chime in. She left me a voicemail so dramatic, I couldn't decide whether to scream or roll my eyes. Clara, you embarrassed Mark in front of his colleagues. Do you know how that makes me look? As if her image was my top priority. Even my mom, who usually tried to smooth things over, was furious. She called me 2 days after the party. Clara, she said, her voice sharp, your behavior was completely unacceptable. My behavior? I shot back. You asked me to set the table for a party I wasn't even invited to. What did you expect? I expected you to be mature, she snapped. You've always been the reliable one, Clara. This was so out of character. Maybe you should have thought about that before treating me like a maid, I said. I'm done being your go-to. Find someone else to exploit. She gasped, like I'd slapped her. Exploit? Clara, we're family. Exactly, I said. And family is supposed to appreciate each other, not use them. Then I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt free, truly free. No more guilt, no more obligations, just peace. Story 2. I'm 25 now, living with my grandma. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. My mom passed away when I was a baby, and my dad, well, he took off when I was 5, just vanished. Left me with my grandparents and never looked back. So it's always been me and Grandma and Grandpa. They were in their 50s when they took me in, not rich by any means, but they were the best. They worked hard to give me a good life, never complained, always put me first. Grandma was a tough one, always hustling, taking on odd jobs, cleaning houses, working at the local grocery store. But she always had a smile for me, always made sure I had what I needed. I remember how proud I was when I started school. Grandma saved up to buy me this bright pink backpack with cartoon characters on it. I wore that thing everywhere. Grandpa was quieter, but he loved me just as much. He'd sneak candy into my lunchbox, let me stay up past bedtime when Grandma wasn't looking. He showed his love in those small, quiet ways. As I got older, I started to realize how hard they were working to keep things afloat. Grandpa had a steady job at the post office, but it wasn't much. We weren't poor, but we weren't well off either. When I was in middle school, I started thinking about high school. I was a good student, always loved learning, and I had this dream of going to a top-tier high school. It felt like a way out, a way to make something of myself. One night at dinner, Grandma casually mentioned not to stress too much about high school, just choose one I liked. I knew she was worried about the cost of private school. They never talked about money troubles, but I wasn't oblivious, so I studied my butt off, determined to get into the best public high school I could. I didn't want them spending money they didn't have, and I did it. Aced the entrance exam, got accepted. I'll never forget the look on my grandparents' faces when I told them. Grandpa, who rarely showed emotion, actually hugged me. I think I saw him cry for the first time. They were so proud. And for the first time, I felt like I was doing something right, like I was paying them back for all they'd done for me. We even went out to a nice restaurant to celebrate. It was a big deal for us. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. But high school wasn't all smooth sailing. Things were about to get a lot more complicated. High school was a blur. Good grades, extracurriculars, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while my world was tilting on its axis. It started with a feeling, a heaviness in the house, a cloud hanging over everything. One afternoon, I found Grandma sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "Grandpa's sick," she said, her voice thick with worry. I didn't understand the gravity of it at first, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't just a cold or the flu. Grandpa was fading. Hospital visits became a regular occurrence. Each time he came home, he looked weaker, more fragile. He stopped working, and Grandma had to pick up extra shifts to make ends meet. I felt helpless. Tried to focus on school, but it was hard. How could I think about algebra when all I could see was Grandpa's gaunt face, Grandma's exhausted eyes? I started helping out more around the house, cooking, cleaning, anything to ease their burden. Even got a part-time job to contribute, but it never felt like enough. Watching Grandpa deteriorate was the hardest part. He'd try to be cheerful, tell me stories, but his voice was weak, his smile strained. One day, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't comprehend, and said, "Jenny, I'm sorry." Sorry for what? For being sick? For not being the strong, steady grandpa I knew? I didn't have an answer. Grandma was the rock. She never complained, never let her worry show, but I saw it in the slump of her shoulders, the lines etched on her face. She was carrying the weight of the world, and it was breaking her. The hospital bills piled up. The insurance barely covered anything. Grandma started talking about applying for government assistance. It was a blow to her pride, but we didn't have a choice. I remember the day she came home with the application forms, a mountain of paperwork, confusing and overwhelming. We sat at the kitchen table, filling them out together, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. The approval came a few weeks later. It was a relief, but it also felt like a defeat. We were officially on assistance, a stark reminder of how precarious our situation had become. Grandpa's health continued to decline. Each hospital stay chipped away at his strength, his spirit. One night, after a particularly bad episode, Grandma broke down. I'd never seen her cry before. It was terrifying. We were running on fumes, both of us, exhausted, scared, and clinging to a hope that was fading fast. Then came the call, the one we'd been dreading. Grandpa was gone. I didn't cry at first, just felt numb, like a part of me had died with him. Grandma held me that night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a child again, small, vulnerable, and utterly lost. The world felt muted after Grandpa's death. The house echoed with his absence. Grandma and I moved through our days like ghosts, haunted by the memories that clung to every corner. I put off college and found a full-time job. There was no way I was leaving Grandma alone, not now. She needed me, and I needed to be there for her, just like she'd always been there for me. We settled into a new routine. Work, bills, sleep, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. We were managing, barely. Then came the phone call that turned everything upside down. "Hello, is this Jennifer?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" I'm your father's wife. My father. The man who'd abandoned me, who'd been a stranger for 20 years. His wife. I didn't even know he was married. "I'm sorry to tell you this," she continued, "but your father passed away in a car accident." I felt nothing. No sadness, no grief, just a hollow ache. What was I supposed to feel? This man was practically a ghost to me. Then she mentioned inheritance, assets, a claim. Suddenly, this man who'd been absent from my life was a source of unexpected wealth. It felt surreal, almost offensive. And then came the request, thinly veiled and dripping with entitlement. "Would you consider giving up your inheritance rights?" she asked. "It would make things easier for us, for me. No pretense of grief, no concern for my well-being. Just a blatant demand for me to step aside so she could inherit everything." "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not giving up anything." She wasn't happy. "You didn't even have a relationship with him," she argued. "What difference does it make to you?" "He was my father," I retorted, "and I deserve what's rightfully mine." She hung up, fuming. I sat there, stunned. This man, this ghost from my past, was now causing chaos in my present. Grandma wasn't surprised. "I always knew your father was selfish," she said. "But this is low, even for him." We consulted a lawyer, a cousin of ours, a straight-talking man who didn't mince words. He laid out the facts. My father had left behind a decent amount of assets, and as his biological child, I was entitled to half. "She's likely to contest it," he warned. "This could get messy." I didn't care. I wasn't going to be bullied. Grandma agreed. "You deserve this, Jenny," she said. "Don't let that woman take what's yours." So we fought. Letters flew back and forth. Meetings were held. Accusations were made. They even tried to claim I wasn't really his daughter. It was exhausting, draining. I was losing sleep, my stomach constantly in knots. But Grandma was right. I had to stand my ground. Then, a breakthrough. My lawyer called with unexpected news. "They're offering a settlement," he said. "A settlement?" I repeated, disbelief coloring my voice. "They're offering to split everything 50-50, he explained. No further contest. Relief washed over me. It was finally over. When I told Grandma, she smiled. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You stood your ground. That's what matters." And just like that, it was done. We got our share, enough to pay off the bills, build some savings, and finally let Grandma retire. That was the best part. Seeing her relax, knowing she didn't have to struggle anymore. It made everything worth it. I thought a lot about my father after that. The man who'd been a stranger, who'd left me with nothing but questions. In the end, he'd inadvertently given me something valuable. Not just the money, but a sense of justice, of closure. It wasn't about the inheritance. Not really. It was about standing up for myself, for Grandma, for what was right. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Update. Life settled into a quieter rhythm after the inheritance battle. I focused on taking care of Grandma, making sure she was comfortable. It felt good to finally be able to provide for her, to repay her for all the years of love and sacrifice. But there was a strange emptiness too. I'd spent so long fighting, so focused on the conflict, that when it was over, I felt adrift. I'd hoped for some kind of revelation, some understanding of why my father had left. But there were no answers, just a void where a father should have been. One evening, as Grandma and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "It's time for you to start thinking about yourself now. You've been taking care of everyone else for so long." She was right. I'd been so focused on fulfilling my obligations, on surviving, that I'd forgotten to dream. Now, with the weight of the past lifted, I could finally look to the future. A future filled with possibilities, with choices that were truly my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of excitement, a sense of hope that had been dormant for far too long.